So welcome to another edition of Circus History Live. If everyone could please mute your microphones, that'll help us with the bandwidth a little bit, maybe even mute your camera too. We've got a great show, as I said. We're calling it The Producers. Originally, Billy Martin was going to be joining us. At the last minute, he's got a show going on right now, and he wasn't able to join us. But we've got a couple of great guys who are going to tell us about what it's like to produce circuses. First of all, we've got Wayne McCary. Wayne McCary has over 41 consecutive years of producing the Big E Super Circus in Massachusetts, along with the main Shrine Circus dates. He has employed hundreds of circus performers over the years, musicians, other professionals, produced thousands of performances, actually seen by millions of people. So very happy to have Wayne on with us. And we've got Joe Barney. Joe is the owner of Center Ring Productions. They specialize in producing large-scale family entertainment throughout the Northeast. He is also the producer and director of entertainment for Six Flags amusement parks in Massachusetts, New Jersey, and New York. In addition to producing circuses, Joe is a circus clown, ringmaster. He was supervisor of the Big Apple Circus Clown Care Unit at the Yale New Haven Children's Hospital in Connecticut. He's even been a VIP Santa at Macy's in New York City. So happy to have all of you with us today. Very happy to have Wayne and definitely Joe on the line with us. So let's kind of jump into it right away. Wayne, you have been involved with circuses for a long, long time. They say that the only thing that's constant is change. What are we seeing now in circuses?
Well, obviously, I think the biggest change is that animals are becoming less and less prevalent in shows, obviously, for all of the things we know about with the animal activists have really finally achieved their goal. And it's a shame because animals have been an important part of the circus throughout its history, really, starting off with horses. And you know, the Ringling Brothers were famous for the big displays of elephants and big cat acts. And what we find now is when you produce a show, I found it's very difficult today when you can't have an animal act in the show. It's not that you can't have a good show, but you can have the best aerialists, the best jugglers, the best hand balancing acts. But at some point in the show, if you're doing a family show like Joe and I mostly do, kids miss that. And I know for many years, my wife would always remind me and say, be careful you don't produce a show that's so sophisticated that you leave the kids behind. So that is a big challenge today, my view.
And Joe, tell me a little bit about it. I mean, you've got shows that are out there right now. There's still people that are training animals, but we're not seeing them.
Well, I think the other thing that and I totally agree with Wayne, that we have to watch the sophistication of what we're offering. A lot of the people that we're doing shows for, meaning circus shows for right now, some have not seen a circus whatsoever. They don't know what to expect. Others are the grandmas, the grandpas, and they're telling, oh, we had elephants, we had tigers, we had this, we had that. So this can't be any good if it doesn't have any of that. So we've got a little bit of a higher wall to scale to get that enjoyment factor in there. I guess the thing that I do mostly when we're putting together a show right now during these times is that I kind of look through the world of as if I was 5 or 6 years old or 7 years old, of what I would like to see. My wife tells everybody that she really has 7 children and I'm the oldest. And a lot of that has to do with what we produce, whether it's clowns, whether it's dogs, still seem to be very, very acceptable. Every dog act that we have used lately have been dogs that are rescued. And clowns, good comedic jugglers. But I do think that we lose some of our, do I want to say sellability? Is that a word that we get those crowds in by offering good family fun that leaves the family laughing, having a good time, enjoying. even from my days of being Santa Claus and the clown and everything else, we love to watch the mom and dads are absolutely enthralled with their own children and how their children are enjoying the show. So
You know, when you think of that, and the folks who are watching this, I think for the most part have a nostalgic view of of the circus as they remembered it, whether they were seeing it as kids or whether they were actually involved with the circus as performers or in some other capacity. Knowing your audience, that's really important, isn't it, Wayne?
Yeah, it definitely is. And when I first came into the business in about 1967, the circus, of course, was much different. The industry consisted of the greatest show on earth, which was a standalone circumstance. No one replicated in the industry what they could do. In addition to that, there was the shrine circus business, and the shrine circus always appealed, of course, the bottom line for them was catering to families and youngsters. In addition to that, there was probably 15 or 20 tent shows traveling the country of various sizes. And then it was the independent business that I got into, the spot dates, the event business. And at that time, amusement parks, going way back, Joe, before Six Flags, it was common for amusement parks, especially here in the Northeast, to have a circus act every week of the season,
right.
from Memorial Day through Labor Day. They gave us the winter off in those days, not like you now, you're going year round. But it was those parks that we had 7 to 10 parks every season. So you could book a quality act and route them through the parks. Ocean Beach Park, which is where I grew up, would have a circus act on the boardwalk every week. We had a park in Rhode Island, Rocky Point Park, that took the circus act for 2 weeks, and on and on. We had 10 or 12 of those parks. So people had opportunities to see quality acts in that environment. At that time, big fairs, were not in the circus business. The county fairs, and it's funny because in those days I thought we had very minimalistic shows, but it was normal for us to put a show with 6, 7, 8 acts into county fairs during that time frame. So there were a lot of options, I guess you could say, to see circus in those days. And the one ring circus was not prevalent at that time for the most part.
The circus lives a lot of places, as Joe Barney will tell you. And I mean, you've got shows that right now, as we're speaking, you've got a tenant show in Boston. You've got acts that you put into Six Flags and various places. Tell me a little bit about the breadth of your personal business and how you got into it.
Well, I actually fell in love with the circus when I was very, very small. My family has been involved in vaudeville. Both sets of grandparents appeared in vaudeville. My grandfather on my dad's side, or his father, I should say, was a little person. So we've always had that connection to little people. I tell everybody when they ask me about being Santa Claus, I said I truly have elfin blood in running through my veins, but fell in love with the circus. I can remember when I was 5 years old, the first time of actually entering the old garden in New York City and going downstairs in the basement and seeing the menagerie and smelling the smell. So to me, the smell was almost as good as actually seeing the show. Watching Lou Jacobs come out of the car, watching Albert Ricks, watching Roland Tibor and the sea lions and all. Oh my God, it was magical. And I was bit right from the get-go. And as I said, I started producing shows, I'd say probably in the early 80s, by the time it got really, really busy for me. And right now we have circuses under 10. So a lot of what we're doing are things that you would never think about, where the circus would pop up or where it would end. We have 2 shows that actually come together at the end of a Christmas light drive-through. So when you drive through the Christmas lights and you think about an amusement park, or in this case, a zoo, that when you drive through the park, there's no chance for you to sell any food or to sell any concessions or really to sell anything. So when they get to the end, it's like being how they started with a trolley park. You would take the trolley out to an amusement park. When you hit the end of the trolley line, boom, you were in heaven. Well, when you hit the end of the drive-through light show, all of a sudden there is a circus tent filled with sparkling lights and clowns and, jugglers and, oh my God. And then Santa Claus at the same, we have got a captive audience. And our business through the drive-throughs has grown incredibly. And since COVID has hit, some of our regular parks that have just existed with shows on the weekends now have opened 7 days a week with the drive-throughs, and then being at the end where there is a show to top everything off, to see Santa Claus, to see the jugglers, to see the magic show or whatever. So it really is a change in the way things are going. And as I was saying before, our season, which used to be in the parks from Memorial Day to Labor Day, now runs 12 months.
Well, again, the circus, as we said, has always been changing. Wayne, talking about this back end show, which didn't exist at fairs in the past. Joe talks about, kind of being the big payoff at the end. And there were, Clyde Beatty had a circus on the Johnny Jones show back in the 1940s. But you have had a couple of tremendously successful events recently with fairs. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it didn't take much to lure me out of retirement when I had an opportunity to do a couple of shows under tents. We did 5 years in Salt Lake City at the State Fair. And the idea, and then in 2018 and 19, we went to the State Fair of Indiana in Indianapolis. And the idea was to try to replicate the experience of the Big E, because the success of that show over many, many years, going back to 1970, is well known in the fair industry, and it's been replicated by others since that time. I think the thing that I learned very quickly at the Big E was how powerful attraction the circus could be. Now, the circus at the E, which we started in 1970, in the building, as you pointed out, for 17-day run, there is no big name concert that could ever have played the Big E for 17 days and drawn thousands of people. I don't care how big the name was. And for that reason, most of the concerts that we brought in were strictly one performances, and you hoped it didn't rain, and you hoped that they had a hit in the market when you brought them in. But the circus, again, at the fair, it was a good marriage with the family business that comes, to fairs. And each year at the E, we would draw at least 80,000 people over the 17 days. And the same experience translated to Indianapolis. We turned the first year there, even though I brought Circus Sarasota's tent and equipment to Indianapolis, we couldn't even accommodate the people in 3 performances a day. So to me, it was proof that if you have a quality show, people still love the circus. No, there's no question about it. Unfortunately, like a lot of things in life, people sometimes cut too many corners. And people used to say to me, if you have competition and you're worried there was another show in town, and I would always say this: competition never bothered me as long as it was good.
Well, you're both known for your quality shows that you've put on. Again, much different than a traveling circus such as the Ringling Circus or Beatty Cole or Circus Vargas, some of the others that are out there. But when you think about it, Joe, where do you find those quality acts? I mean, and do you go back to the well with the same acts over and over again?
Well, I think the other thing with the quality acts is that we are as producers of entertainment right now, are in a difficult situation. because being able to bring acts out of Europe has become practically impossible due to all the COVID restrictions and everything else that we have. In the United States, there are acts that have decided that they're no longer going out. I mean, performers that have been with the Big Apple Circus, performers that have been at some of the top of their game, have now got real jobs. I can. My wife for 40 years has said to me, "Are you ever going to get a real job, honey? What do you mean?" It's like, but I mean, these folks have made that choice of getting out of the business. For me, I have had some trusted acts over the years that I know will fill my seats, that will make people happy, that will bring the sparkle of the show. But as the production end of what we do, it's the way that we package it, the way that it goes out, the way that we have sideshows that we've put together for the Six Flags organization at their various parks. So it's great to bring just a sideshow out, but in many cases, when you hear the word sideshow, what happens? You get a negative connotation. Still, there is a rebirth. People still want to go see them. So we have to do a little candy coating. So when we do one of the characters that I play for Six Flags, if you remember the Addams Family, I play Uncle Fester. And that's probably not a big far off,
Well, if you need a West Coast version, I'm available.
I know where I'll have to teach you how to light the light bulb. But we do a sideshow called Fester's Funorama. And we introduce all the sideshow people as part of Fester's family. So
Very
we have
interesting.
fire readers, the nail through the nose, all that, fish hooks in the eyes, which now we can do for an entirely different audience. It's not just, oh my God, ooh, ooh, ooh. No, that it becomes an entire production. So really the way that we package it and the way that we take those acts, we're doing a show right now in Mendon, Massachusetts at the Southwick Zoo, and they're having a Chinese Lantern Festival. So when they came to me and asked me to put together a show that would highlight the Chinese Lantern Festival, I was lucky enough to find some amazing Asian performers that perform classic Chinese, Asian, bowl spinning, all that, foot juggling, and they bring the house down every night.
Proving again that the circus exists in a lot of places.
Oh,
Wayne, when you think of some of those acts, and as Joe was saying, that relationship, the loyalty that you as a producer and that the performers have with you. I mean, I know you take a guy like the great bear trainer, Albert Ricks, you had a fantastic relationship with him. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, Albert was a great guy, and he originally came over from the Hagenbeck Zoo in Germany for Ringling when it was under canvas. And it's funny because I saw him perform on the Ringling show under canvas, never thinking at that time that we'd be working together. But Albert worked a lot of dates for me, and you're right, loyalty was important, and establishing a good relationship with these people was critical. And on 2 different years, I can still recall one year, Albert jumped from Honolulu to Lewiston, Maine for me. I mean, they had to drive once they got to California around the clock to make it. And another year, they came from Mexico City to New England under the same kind of circumstances. So those were things that people did not just for a salary.
You talk about the Lewiston, Maine dates, and for people on this call or people who are watching it that may not be familiar with what have been called the Maine dates, the Shrine Circus dates. I mean, you really developed that not only in the state of Maine, but even into Canada, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Right. We had originally the original nucleus of the Maine dates were 3 cities: Portland, Lewiston, and Augusta, Maine. The second year I was producing for them, we expanded the show into Bangor and Caribou and ultimately Presque Isle. 2 years later, expanded the show into 4 cities in New Brunswick and also Manchester, New Hampshire. So it was very helpful from the standpoint of being able to offer some of these independent contracted acts a longer run. And that, as a performer, performers always had to weigh up. Do we want the season where perhaps the salary is significantly less, or do we want to take a chance that we can put together enough of independent event dates to come out on top at the end of the year? So that was always back and forth with various performers. But again, back in the 70s and the early 80s, the well was deep in terms of stellar talent that was available. I mean, I remember in the early years, we booked people before Big Tommy from the Diana Elephant Herd went to Ringling and became King Tuss. That was my go-to herd of elephants for my shows. Carl Wallenda and his original wire act, Tarzan Zerbini. These are I remember Bobo Barnett. Probably people on here never heard of Bobo Barnett. He was one of the greatest clowns of all time. Victor Julian was the gold standard, who was emulated by people with the dress-up dog routine. So there were hundreds, literally, of people of that caliber that we were able to secure who were working independent dates. J. Fred Muggs, remember, he used to be on the Dave Garroway show.
The monkey.
We toured him for the whole summer. But today, as you just heard, it's very difficult. The well is not so deep. And when you have a contract that you can produce a first-class show, it's not easy to secure that kind of talent today. And part of it is because there's not enough work for these people in this country. And I think there aren't that many touring shows, but many performers, if they can grab one of those contracts, that's what they want to do.
So, Joe, let's take a look at that. I mean, those are all excellent points that Wayne said about they're not really doing the work out there. You've got multiple shows out there. Where do you find this talent?
Well, as Wayne said, there's loyalty. And what's nice is that the word spreads. There isn't a week that goes by that my phone doesn't ring and I get, I'm a friend of so-and-so's and I do this. Or I'm a friend of this fella's who tells me you might be able to use me doing this. And those calls come not only from the United States, but also from Europe. My phone will ring in the middle of the night, which you always hate when the phone rings in the middle of the night, especially when somebody's trying to peddle you a dog act or somebody's, whoa, wait a minute. Do you know what time it is here in the United States? But a lot of that has to come. And I go to a tremendous amount of circuses, and I go to a tremendous amount of fairs to see what's out there, to see what's coming up, what may work. Here's an example, perfect example. What's going to work in New York City may not work down south or may not work in Chicago. And there's a whole different way of looking at things and what's a perfect. So you need not, as we say, know your audience. You need to know the geographic, where we're going to go. For years, I produced the New York Holiday Circus in Brighton Beach in Coney Island. And oh my word, it was a piece of work to produce it, but it was a fantastic show and it was very well attended. But we had a very heavy Russian influence in that neighborhood. So we had many Russian acts on the show. But we knew it came back to being know your audience. So,
I imagine there was also a time when you were getting a lot of videotapes from people, little VHS tapes with their act on it. But how important is it for you to actually see the act in person rather than hire somebody sight unseen? Because the video is going to be pretty good.
Video is going to be pretty good, and that's going to be the bits and pieces. I really like to see that performer of who I'm going to stand behind and represent to one of my clients, that this performer is going to bring the house down. And finding them out, it's sort of like saying squirreling it out too, where they're performing. A lot of the performers, as Wayne was saying, now when they'll come to me and say, I hear you're hiring for 3 months, or I hear you're hiring for 4 months, I can stay in one place for 4 months, not spend gas. I can have all of my utilities paid. I can have all of my, you supply housing, you supply trailer park. That's heaven. People are like, oh, let me do that. And then if we're able to work some type of a deal where they're going to get a piece of their concession or cherry pie, which is very much prevalent in the business.
Yeah.
We did everything from snake pictures to, the old, the mouse. Remember we used to have the little furry mouse that you used to move on your hand? Oh my God. So,
So Wayne, when you take a look at how the business has changed over the decades that you've been involved, Joe is talking about transportation. There was probably a time when some of those acts that you hired, they were very accustomed to those long jumps like Albert Ricks made, but it's kind of changed today, right?
Yeah, it has. And that's something that's added to the expense for the producer. Years back, nearly every circus performer traveled with their own recreational vehicle, trailers or campers of some type. So transportation was never, and housing was never an issue. Today, it's the complete opposite in a lot of cases. Most performers playing the independent circus dates and club dates, like say in Vegas, or they shoot off to Europe for a Christmas show, they do not have trailers anymore. And so now you're negotiating the expense in many cases of flying them from where they are to your date and putting them up in a hotel. And in some cases, having to arrange to transport them, from the hotel to the lot. That's a major change that in terms of what the performers are doing today. And I think a lot of it is because there's not enough of work, consistent work, for them to keep a trailer on the road. And they're finding that these independent dates, whether they're Vegas or Amsterdam or in Sarasota, wherever they are, they're far apart. And they're in different circumstance.
Yeah, it's interesting. Dieter Tasso, the great juggler, slackwire juggler, once told me that what he would do, basically, I mean, this is a guy who did a slackwire act, but he could still take, it was a suitcase act, because when he would get to a town, he would go to like a Sears and Roebuck and buy a hammock, one of those little hammocks, and string up his slackwire on that, and that created his act. But most people, if they're traveling with a lot of props or costumes and things like that, you can't necessarily do it in a suitcase.
not anymore.
So, folks, we are joined today by Wayne McCary and Joe Barney. This is Circus History Live. It's our monthly get-together to talk about things that are important to those of us who appreciate circus history, put on by the Circus Historical Society. If you're not a member already, I would urge you to join. To learn more about it, going to circushistory.org. Bandwagon Magazine is just one of the benefits of Circus History Live, and it's really an opportunity to kind of go in depth on the Circus Historical Society, rather, to go in depth into circus history. And if you're not a member, at the end of the call, I hope that you will join us. We're going to take questions too from people who are on this call today. At the bottom of your screen, there's a mark there. It says chat. And if you have some questions for either Wayne or Joe, feel free to type them in there, and we'll go ahead and ask around a little bit. But I'm going to kind of throw it to you again, Wayne, off the top here. You've been in the business for a long time. You've worked with great acts. You mentioned Bobo Barnett. Who was the best clown you ever booked?
Bobo Barnett.
And tell me a little bit about why you say.
I mean, unless I don't classify someone like Bello in that same category. Obviously, particularly his William Tell routine brings the house down everywhere. And one of the most speaking of Bello, because he's worked many shows for us, one of the most unique things I ever saw him do, Bruce, who's on the call, saw this too. when he was in Monte Carlo in the festival just a few years back, someone had the great idea of him having commanding a group of Holstein cows in a Liberty Act. And it was the funniest thing. I wanted to lay down on the floor laughing because the cows went every which way, and he wound up just chasing them around the ring. And, if you ask him about it today, he'll tell you what a crazy experience it was. But Bobo Barnett had the small car, a very small car with headlights. So you would bring him in a complete blackout. He had a dog or two in that car with him, and he was a big man. But he would get out of that car and he would sit on the ring curb in his rags and play the blues, and we put blue spots on him and bring the house down. He's an unbelievable performer and a very nice guy to work with as well. But that's going back a long way.
It
but
is.
This is a problem now. There's very little comedy available to put in a show that's high caliber.
Well,
There's just not much.
And Joe has a lot of information on clowning that I want to talk about also. But one of the things about clowning right now is, as you mentioned Bello. Bello is a tremendous comedic performer. I think anybody who's ever seen him knows that he relates to the children and anyone in the audience, but especially the kids, almost as a cartoon character who does these unusual things. Joe, you've been a clown yourself. You know clowning. I mean, we've seen a lot of things evolve in the circus. What about clowning?
Oh, I think clowning is on a growth again, but it is being it's changing exceptionally. When I first fell in love with clowning, I fell in love with the likes of Bobby Kay, of Lou Jacobs, Otto Griebling, Ron Severini, all those guys. And
David Carlion, I think he was in there too, right?
Yes, David, right. David, yes. Yep, it was all those and Buttons McBride and all those, and I toured with Frosty for a while, Frosty Little too, but the change has gone so much with less makeup and more comedy. You saw that to begin with back in Ringling with David Larible, with Tommy Doherty, and changes in Bello and things like that, where you don't have the full clown face. I don't know of any show right now that carries a full-blown clown face. I mean, let's look at Steve and Ryan, who I think are probably some of the best of the clowns of the new age, should I say. And I know I've seen them perform at the Big E and do their song and dance routine, and see them perform at Circus World and bring the house down. They're now out with the new Alcatraz show, which is a brand new thing for them that they're doing, and they're bringing the house down. And I think if you're funny, you're funny. That's what it comes down to. It goes back to what I was saying before, is that if you turned in to watch Abbott and Costello or Laurel and Hardy or the Little Rascals or whatever, you laughed because it was the fellows that were doing, or the group that was doing the funny. It didn't necessarily need the makeup and the wigs and the nose and everything else. But for a long time, I was a purist. If you didn't have that white face on, you didn't have that nose, you didn't have that fright wig, you weren't a clown. Well, not anymore. I can sit back and see some wonderful clowns that are out there.
It's interesting, and anyone who has seen Circus Vasquez this year knows that the way that the show starts is David Larible comes out outside of makeup and sort of puts on his makeup during the show, and I think that that's one of those attempts to try to get away from the scary clown thing. We have a couple of questions that are coming in here. First of all, Donald asks a question. He says, the circus is obviously changing. Donald is hoping that maybe it'll swing back the other way and have animal acts. Is that a realistic expectation, Wayne?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I wish I could say yes, but I have to say no. Through the Big E and the OABA, which I've been a part of for a long time with their circus wing, and have been to hearing after hearing and raised a lot of money over the years, and was side by side with Ringling's representation in many states. And each year it got tougher and tougher and tougher. And when Ringling pulled the elephants, that really, I think, was the end in terms of the potential to have elephants in the country, because legislators who don't know an awful lot about the circus, when that happened and you went to subsequent hearings, one of the first things you heard was, well, Ringling gave up their elephants, so, why do you want them, or why should we have them in Massachusetts anymore? And the activists, unfortunately, very well financed. The hearings were always difficult because you were trying to convince people who most people are against any kind of abuse of an animal. And we weren't talking about abuse, in 99% of the cases. So I believe that the movement was so strong, so successful, and besides that, other than the large number of elephants that Carson and Barnes still has, there are very few elephants, performing elephants, left in the country, and because you can't import them, of course, I'm afraid it's a thing of the past, and that's a sad commentary in my view.
It is something that I think everyone on this call has grown up with, at least today. This call will, of course, appear and live forever on YouTube, so we don't know who's going to see it decades from now. But from your perspective, Joe, you have dog acts in your shows, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. My perspective, I do not think we're going to see any type of exotic animal return to the ring. I think that you're still going to see horses in some extent, ponies. I still think you'll see a camel on occasion, because people don't look at camels as a very wild animal. They're domesticated. Dogs bring down the house because dogs have that cuteness factor. As Wayne had said before with Victor Julian and with the dressed up dogs, we put a dog in a dress, it brings down the house. But there's always those 5 or 6 people that say, oh my God, how can you do that to the poor animal? So there's both sides of the coin. And I currently have the Puppies of Penzance, Carolyn Rice, working with us right now in one of our shows. She brings down the house every night. The kids absolutely love it because they can relate to these animals.
Sure.
90% of them have these type of animals at home. She uses a duck in the show. And it's incredible because people love to see that still.
They do, don't they? So the other thing,
as a quick aside, for 35 years, I never produced a circus date without elephants and without a major cage act. And in the recent years, I've not had either.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about your background there a little bit, Wayne. The other question Donald had was related to 3 rings versus 1 ring. And you had originally, I think your very first circuses were 3-ring circuses, but you kind of embraced the 1 ring format. And of course, that's what you've done most recently.
Yeah, I think part of it was when I took over the main circuit. It was a 1-ring show because of the size of the buildings were relatively small, and as compared to some of the big arenas in the big cities with thousands and thousands of seats. And from the get-go, I always thought that people liked to see the best quality you could get. And even on the big 3-ring shows, even sometimes on the Ringling show, the premier acts worked alone. And that was the path that I followed almost from the beginning. I did have an opportunity in the early 70s. There was a major producer by the name of Tom Pax, who had a significant number of dates around the country. Well, when he passed away, his widow asked me if I could take over the show and run it, and I did for a couple of years. Now that was a show that played stadiums, had the shrine date in New Orleans, which was the second largest shrine date in the country. Those shows called for 3 rings. I mean, in New Orleans, and we played Wichita, Kansas, with West Virginia, Mississippi, and Louisiana. But those kind of shows required really 3 rings. And like in New Orleans, I carried 2 cage acts, 1 to open each half, 2 flying acts, 8 elephants, and so on. And the stadium dates, and I could speak all night on this relationship. I had John Cuneo with Herder with her bears, John with the cat act. And those big dates, we carried 5 or 8 elephants for those stadiums. And the last 3 acts in the show would be the elephants, the double zucchini cannon, and then 5 or 6 minutes of fireworks explode at the end of the show. But I always felt that the one ring show was the most enjoyable, and part of it is the experience. And sometimes I would see an act like Joe. I traveled all around to look firsthand at performers and see, what was new and what was different. As the environment in the one ring put the audience so close to the performer, and you could take the same premier act and put them in a coliseum or an arena with 10,000 seats, and the reaction was totally different. There's an immersion of in the one ring environment. And Circus Sarasota, produced by Pedro and Dolly, is an incredible example of how the one ring show can be a tremendous success. Why? Because no one sits more than 50 feet from the ring, so they feel like they're connected to the act, and they bring in the premier talent that they every time, and they change it enough so that it has a new variety. And I always found that to be so. The Big Apple, of course, is back this year. I haven't seen it yet, but for many years, the Big Apple Circus certainly did the same thing. And that's what we tried to do at the Big E. And to me, it was the environment was 51% of the experience that people had when they came to the show.
So, and it's getting people to the show is probably the most important thing for any circus, except for maybe those old phone dates that they used to play. You want to get people to come. P.T. Barnum, one of the quotes that he's been quoted as saying is that he wasted half of the money he spent on advertising was wasted. He just didn't know which half. And so today, now with social media, we have the ability to actually quantify through clicks what people are able to see. So Joe, do you use social media to promote your shows, and how effective is it at selling tickets?
It is very effective. It is very effective, more so than remember the old free kids tickets and all that other stuff. Social media is the way to go these days to fill you can start social media so far out in advance for very, very little money, and to actually have it build as you get closer to your date. Our shows that we have on some of these drive-through light displays and all that are included in their social media, and we see that it builds. Right now, our shows, the holiday shows, are sold out every night because of people saying, oh my God, this is great. Not only do we get to see Christmas lights and Santa Claus, but we get to see the circus. And I think a lot of the time, and I don't know what Wayne's reaction is on this too, is our shows don't normally run over a half hour anymore. which is amazing. Because the theme parks and the zoos and everything else want a half hour worth of show to get people in, to get them warm, to give them that experience, and then to send them on their way to enjoy something. It's like being in a restaurant where you want to turn that tent over as many times as you can during that night in order to bring enough people in. Not only, the old saying is you have to get them into the ballpark before you can sell the hot dogs. And that's what this is a lot has to do with, is how do we get them into that tent? And we don't have the premier acts. And there's a lot of people that don't, the sponsors will not have the budgets to do that.
So, you talked a little bit
Yeah.
earlier. You talked a little bit earlier about selling concessions in the sideshow. You want to sell those hot dogs too, right? I mean, that can make a difference between being in the black and being in the red, right? The concession.
Absolutely. And it's one thing, and I try to give this with all of my performers that work with me, is the ability, is what has been known in our business for the longest time, is cherry pie. But we have been blessed to make some deals with some of our theaters where we get all of the light display, the winky blinky lights or popcorn or cotton candy and all of that. All of my kids learned face painting. All of my kids learned.
You've got a lot of kids. You've got like 6 kids, right?
I'll tell you. When the Barneys came, we had to have a van just to take the kids to work. It's like, okay, everybody, we're going to work. And anyone who said to me, "Oh, I don't want to go to work," I said, "Would you like to continue to go to school? We're going to work."
So Wayne, we were talking a little bit earlier about this 3-ring versus 1 ring. When you were putting together one of those big shows, the Tom Pax dates or whatever, a lot of times I know you'd hire acts, family acts, basically, that had, multiple acts that they could do. Maybe they were a juggler, maybe they worked on a wire, maybe they did Spanish web. Is that still something that, when you were doing the Big E circuses, that you were looking for acts that could do multiple turns?
For the most part, no. I always felt that performers who did 4 or 5 acts, that they couldn't excel in all 4 or 5 acts. At the most, we would hire somebody that did 2 turns, and very, very often, most of the show would only be 1 turn. Whatever that performer or that family did, that was their ace performance. That's what we tried to use. And of course, it's more expensive to do that. I just wanted to pick up on something about marketing that you said. I learned early on how important marketing is, and a lot of shows failed over the years because they didn't know how to market their show. The very first show I did in 1967 was a show at the Waterford Speed Bowl, near where I lived. And I thought because we had thousands of people who came out for the auto racing that we could turn that same crowd and bring them to the circus. So we didn't do much promoting. The show lost money. It was a total failure in terms of the audience. But as time went on, I watched the Ringling Show. And of course, the title, The Greatest Show on Earth, is probably, if not the best, one of the most known titles in the entertainment industry in this country. Yet, if you look back at the tremendous marketing that they did in every city, it told you something, that just because you had the product, you had to compete with other things going on and you had to sell it. As a result, at the Big E, to the chagrin of some of the trustees, we would spend $1 million a year to promote a 17-day event. We were drawing well over 1 million people, but I never believed you could sustain that without a tremendous underpinning of a marketing effort.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you do have to spend the money to get people to go there. And then the weather can play havoc. Even with indoor shows, you can get snow. I mean, you had a situation in Salt Lake City. Tell us about that rain that you had when you had the Ramos tent out there.
Yeah, I think it never rained in Salt Lake City till I got out there. But one of the one of the years, there was a cloudburst. The water wound up to my knees on a location on the lot. We had to take everything out, the seats. We had to bring in a bulldozer to scoop out the mud, and it knocked us down for a day. But it was quite an event, you know, getting the people out, because it was one of these storms that came out of nowhere. So yeah, it's being out with the tent is a great experience. But as Joe mentioned earlier, with his Boston tent out there, that's another challenge to make sure you take care of that.
So, Joe, what makes a circus successful today?
I think that you have to make the show, the circus itself, an experience. It cannot be just the fact that you're going to go into a tent to watch a few acts. It has to be a full-blown experience. That the show must start from the very look of the tent, from the look of the entrance, to the smell, to the lighting, to what is perceived by the public as to be a great show. If you're going to go into a tent that doesn't look nice, or go into an area or a circus performance that doesn't remind people of what the show was, as I said, many of my shows, many of the looks that I go for are that old-fashioned storybook circus look. Why do you think Walt Disney World has a land called Storybook Circus? There's not one act in Storybook Circus. Never was. There is a place you go that you remember what you saw. So the fact that when you walk into our tent, that's all red and white and striped and blue with stars, twinkling lights, Edison lights to guide you in, the smell of popcorn. I do not want popcorn and cotton candy that's prepackaged and brought in. I want it popped. I want it all there, because the smells mean so much. Because that takes me back to the days when I was 5 years old, walking into the menagerie at Ringling Brothers. The smell was like, oh my God, I'm at the circus. So the experience, the laughs, the oh my gods, the danger, that part of the show that grabs your heart. And I think that's important, that one part of that show that you have grabs your heartstrings. Do you want to be thrilled? Do you want to go, oh my God? You need to have all the emotions when you go.
And nostalgia is a big part of that too. We are taking questions for Joe and also Wayne. Appreciate Lane Talbert with a couple of questions that he's given that I articulated for him. I want to ask you a question, Wayne, and this is kind of the $64 question, I guess. Tell me about what the future of the circus is.
I think the circus has a great future in different niches. There'll be different types of shows. I think you'll see some touring shows continue to exist. They'll most likely be in the one ring format. I think you're going to see, there's shows like Vasquez that are a big circus that seem to be doing quite well. And there are lots of types of shows that use good circus talent, like Joe was talking about. You have anchor shows like Circus Sarasota. That's an extraordinary show in my mind. There's talk that Ringling may come back out in the near future with some kind of a new contemporary type show. So I think fairs will continue to use circuses if they are produced with a quality bottom line. Parks like Six Flags that Joe talks about are using circus talent. I think the big change is what we talked about earlier, is the lack of exotic animals being part of these shows. So there will be a challenge on how to keep the kids involved, excited, and not fall asleep, during a show. The circus is evolving, like many things. It's not going to be, unfortunately, I don't think we're ever going back to the big tent shows, for a wide variety of reasons. There's no place to set them down. The overhead of taking that kind of a crew on the road is prohibitive today. But that doesn't mean that the circus is dead. One of the unfortunate things, when Ringling closed, the average consumer, because there was so much publicity about their closing, that the average person thought that the entire circus business was done and over with. Fortunately, that isn't the case. I'm optimistic. I wish I had another 30 years to be on the earth so I could take advantage of some of it. But I think we have to understand it will be different than it is in the past. And we have to embrace the future somehow. But again, if 80,000 people could come to one show at one fair, that tells you something. It's not about me. It tells you about the fact that people enjoy good talent.
And Wayne's referring to the Indianapolis State Fair circus that he produced a couple of years ago. 80,000 people attending the circus is pretty impressive.
Yeah, so we did it. The Big E show was really the format. I produced the show from 1970 through 2012. And I would say, and people like Elaine and Bruce they traveled to my show in Indianapolis, and Bruce even came out to Salt Lake City to make sure I was doing the right thing. But it's, people love something good. And, today you can't fool people. You asked me earlier about whether it was good or did I like buying families that did multiple acts. I think that day is over as well. You can't come in with the same people coming in and out of the ring 5 times.
No. We try to keep this at about an hour. Joe, I'm going to let you have the last word. I've got a couple of questions here. One from our friend Lisa Lewis, who says, basically, what advice would you give to other producers who are coming up today? And Dick Moore, who had a good one too, which says, what are some of the exciting acts that you're seeing right now for the future? So basically, what are the acts that are going to be, making a difference down the road? And then what kind of advice do you give to other people involved with the circus, Joe?
So let's split that in half. I think the acts that I see are coming down the road right now are themed acts, that are going to, you can see this in the fair market, the circuses, the mini shows, the acts that are going out there. You have a what do you want to call it? Space themed thrill show. People love that space themed thrill. There's another where it's an aquatic circus where you have in a pool. There's a whole circus in a pool that you would find in your backyard. And you know what? People are loving it. Loving it. We used to go to the circus to see sea lions in the show. Now there's performing sea lions in a pool that go to fairs that people love it. Oh, I remember seeing that in the circus. So the circus is definitely taking on a new look. And I think that, as Wayne said before, we have to embrace the way the circus is turning out. How many times have I gone on to Facebook or any one of the chats and say, oh, the circus is awful, it's got no animals. No, it's not awful. It's different. Different is different. It doesn't mean awful. So don't preconceive that it's going to be awful because it's not something that you've seen before. I think what Lisa's asking about, what recommendations I would give on a producer out there that's going to start a show. One thing that I've done is I've learned to walk before I run. I think the same with Wayne. We both started with smaller and worked our way up. And in my case, I've started smaller and continue to work my way up to medium. And you know what? I'm very happy at medium because I can control what my audiences see and what my audiences are getting, because I want people to walk out of there not saying, oh my God, that guy who balanced the 16 chairs on his head was terrific. The rest of the show, eh. The popcorn was stale. You couldn't see. The ringmaster sang like he croaked. Blah, 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 blah. You know, I want the whole experience to be number one from start to finish. So if I can accomplish that on a budget that is given to me by the sponsor or the person, and say, I can bring you a magical circus experience that people will be talking about for months. I hate to say the rest of their life, but in a hour, 45 minutes, that's great. Look at how the circus changed during COVID, where so many people like Nino Zope and all, they were doing the drive-in circus. When did you ever think we would do a drive-in circus, sit in the car and watch on a giant TV screen while they did that performance? Never. Never in a million years. It worked. People accepted it. There is a new world a coming, folks. You got to get on, and you got to jump on as the world spins, because it's not going to wait for us. The old days of saying, oh, I miss Ringling Brothers. Yeah, I miss Ringling Brothers. I miss elephants. I miss the smell of elephants. But you know what? I'm marching ahead. I'm keeping going.
Well, I think Terry said it best. Thanks, Wayne and Joe, for keeping the circus alive. You've been watching another edition of Circus History Live from the Circus Historical Society. It's our monthly chance to talk about things that are important to those of us who enjoy circus history. I want to again thank Joe Barney and Wayne McCary for being our guests today. Also, behind the scenes, Bruce Hawley, who did a lot of the heavy lifting on this, and Aileen Barney, who also was kind of behind the controls on the Zoom call. So we will be having another edition of Circus History Live next year in January. Today is December the 12th, 2021, and you've been watching Circus History Live. I urge you to consider joining the Circus Historical Society. For more information, go to circushistory.org. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you down the road.